Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Wild Night Studio. It's Friday night, it's 8 o'clock, and it's time for another delve into the wild. So, this evening, I'll be talking about the power of storytelling. Basically, humans have told stories for millennia. It's the way that we communicate as animals, and would some say it's the thing that sets us above the animals. To paraphrase Doctor Who, obviously that well-known historical figure, yes, even the fact that I'm referencing pop culture and the way that we tell stories, Doctor Who says something along the lines of that's what makes the humans so wonderful in their insignificance, that they mark their birthdays, that they tell stories, that they have these small celebrations of what it means to be human. And one of the reasons why he feels so connected to humanity and so defensive of it. So, again, pop culture references are probably now one of the things that we use most um, to to sort of explain ourselves, to lend metaphor to a situation, or to help us express an idea or articulate our meaning. Um, but stories go back till to the beginning of as soon as humans had language, we were telling stories. Whether that's creation myths from the dawn of time, about how the world began, or how our ancestors settled in a certain place, or the reason that they chose a land, or the ways in which they went about sustaining agriculture. And a lot of these stories that we see of ancestors are what some call the ancestor gods, stories that became godlike down the generations because perhaps they were the first person to the first person to discover that thing. And a way to keep that going or to explain how it happened is to tell the story. And down the line, once people no longer know the person, they've passed on, and they're no longer sort of in living memory, they become sort of immortalized through these stories. And we see that theme again and again, whether it's based on something historical or whether it's something entirely fictitious, but the meaning of the story, the moral behind the story, is there as a framework to teach a different lesson. And these things interest me greatly. These are the things that that make us human. We all tell a story about. We tell a story down the pub. We tell a story amongst our colleagues. Ooh, why am I suddenly yawning? Must be all this oxygen. We tell our stories with our colleagues, with our families. We recount things that have happened, whether they're funny, whether they're sad, whether they're moving. We share our memories and we share our experiences through stories. And often, in order to get that point across, stories become embellished. And with many oral traditions, as the stories are passed on and the next person hears it, a little bit like Chinese whispers, you might say, that next person adds to it, tells it in their own way. So again, once you get hundreds of years, thousands of years down the line, you have a story that still has the same meaning, which is the important part, even though the details and the names and the places may have been changed, forgotten, reinvented, or perhaps purposefully changed to represent the new place, or a new environment or a new community, to make it more relevant as you move through time. It's one of the things that you could say is an unfortunate thing about scripture, holy scripture, is that as soon as it was written down, it became sort of, well, set in stone, in some cases literally carved into stone, but it became like 100% fact. Stories were never meant to be this way. And a lot of indigenous cultures, including my own British paganism, has a lot of oral tradition stories, where stories were told, whether that be medicinal, historical, um, about morality. The meaning was important, the lesson was important. It wasn't necessarily um, the characters or the names or the places or the accuracy of those things. As long as the meaning was the same, and as the teacher um, told the student the story, it was more important that that student understand why the story was being told. More important that they understand the meaning behind it, the metaphor behind it. Because even then, if you did forget the details, if you know the meaning, you know the reason why you're telling the story. And when it became time for that student to continue the stories, become a bard themselves, and carry on those traditions, they knew the core of what it was and the reason why they were telling that story, and the importance that it had to be able to share that with the community. And often the people who were the keepers of these stories, the keepers of history, if you like, or of a community's history, were treated with great reverence. We see them as bards, we see them as druids in this country, and every culture has their own name for them. The people who were the keepers of the history. And that's where story comes from. I think story is very important to humanity in order to be able to help us to connect with each other and have empathy, and also to connect back through time, connect back to be able to throw our mind back to another time, another place, and again have empathy for the people who the story is about, or the culture that the story is about, or just the challenges that the people faced at that time, to see the differences in the way that our world has changed, but to ultimately see the similarities in the fact that humanity is humanity is humanity. And I often wonder, what stories will our descendants tell about this time? How will the facts be skewed? How will heroes and villains rise and fall differently? Because often history is told through the eyes of victors, and the real grassroots things that happened to people aspect of story and of history often gets lost behind this grandiose story of victors of wars and kings and queens and politicians. And I find that's a shame, because the stories of real people do get lost. But I also find it interesting in its own right that even when we look back in history and we see these stories that we then find out perhaps later down the line that's not quite how it happened, the fact that even then people knew about the power of a story. And look at what we have today. Look at the media, the power of a story. The power of a story can make or break somebody's reputation. They can be shot to stardom, or they can be, tossed off a cliff and sent into, into obscurity just from a story. It doesn't even have to be true. It doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be compelling enough to excite the public's imagination, for them to be able to even consider that might have been a possibility. Curious. The other thing about stories, if we're sort of talking on this similar vein, you might want to include sort of conspiracy theories in this. Now, a lot of conspiracy, quote, theories are not necessarily theories. They are uncovered truths that since the limit of statutes has expired, things have now come to light, but yet still they are seen as conspiracies, because they're the things that the story makers in power don't want people to uncover, because it makes them look bad and it contradicts the official truth. I mean, there are many countries that have dictatorship governments that control their storytelling not just through the media, but they will literally go back, they will burn old books, and they will rewrite those periods of history, which is very sad because we lose something in that, even though that is a story itself. The burning of books, the suppression of information, those things become stories, but the stories that they erase, it's very sad. And then we look at stories, things like the Diary of Anne Frank, a young girl in an absolutely terrible situation, kept a diary, a very real, very close to the subject matter, very subjective experience, being just laid out there, in the words of a young woman. Well, she didn't even get the chance to become a young woman, a young girl on the cusp of her womanhood, understanding just in that point where she understood the gravity of the situation she was in, but was helpless to do anything about it. Those are the stories that I think I connect with most when it comes to true historical references. But it doesn't have to be true, it doesn't have to be ethical. I'm sure we've all been moved by stories. In fact, if you're there, and give me a wave if you're watching on YouTube, if you can tune into YouTube, you can leave me a comment. So join the conversation. We all know stories that have moved us, that have stuck with us, whether that be something from popular culture, something from classic literature, or perhaps something that is not even written down, an oral tradition, or perhaps a song, which again is something that's close to my heart, the fact that we keep bardic traditions. We have a lot of traditional music, folk music, that tells the tale. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're a cautionary tale. One of my favourite folk artists, Amy Hopwood, her album has a wonderful collection of this type of music, where each and the production of the album is very simple and beautiful and clean, and allows those stories to really take the spotlight. You can hear the lyrics, and you can hear the emotion that she delivers them with, and whether that be a bit of a reverence or something very sad. Sometimes there's a twist at the end of the tale, always very funny. When that happens in folk music, because it has no folk music has no qualms about being a bit bawdy, about being a little bit cheeky, and it's always interesting to hear words that are no longer in our vocabulary, that we know that we have another word for today, especially when it comes to something that's a bit cheeky. One of my favourite instances of this is a song by Maddie Pryor. It's called "My Man, He's Got No Courage in Him," and basically this is a story of a young maid who is found crying on the moor on May Day, which is the festival, a fertility festival celebration, and a lot of maids were matched at Beltane and or married at Beltane. So this was like a courtship thing, and she realizes that she's married this man, and even though he has a shapely calf, and he has a good singing voice, and everybody in the village loves him, but when it comes down to it, on a night when they're in bed together, he just ain't got no courage in him, and you really do feel for the poor lamb. But the way it's delivered, again, it's a cheeky song, full of humour, as well as a little touch of pathos there. But this is the beautiful thing about folk songs. So there's a nice segue. Did you see what I did there? It segued into folk music. So of course, I've got the Forever Wild music video coming out in like 20 days now. I'm so excited. I still haven't seen an edit yet from the director, Jay, which I'm sure will come to me in the next few days, so I'm very excited about that. And the first thing that I'd like to show you is something that actually my sister made for me, as a personal present, not as anything to be sort of published or anything like that. She presented me with this book. It's in a lovely linen hardback book, and the black end papers. I'm going to see if I can get it up here. And bless her, It's the most beautiful thing. And what she did was she had Forever Wild written as if it was a storybook, with these wonderful big plates, very old-fashioned, as if it was a child's storybook, something that we as kids loved. And we had a lot of these large, sort of big, heavy storybooks that really made it feel like you were, you know, and here's the next story from the days of yore. She's paired it with some nice digital composites that she put together herself. But again, because these were not for publication, they're all just from free stock. But yes, the story goes through and she tells it of the wolf, and there's a wonderful centre paper, which I do love because it's a little bit anime, and the howl rose like the full moon. Can you see that there? Across the centrefold, which I think is wonderful. Yes, and she ends it with a picture. I find the photo. Again with a digital manip of Red Riding Hood in her fur coat, the warrior Red Riding Hood with the wolf at her side. And so, I mean, I cried. It moved me to tears, as I think any kind of really personal and thoughtful gift like that would. But having seen it sort of written down, up until that point, it never really properly occurred to me that in itself it was a story. Let me just have another drink of water. I got excited there. To me, my songs had always been songs. And because I am a fan of rock music, of heavy music, of sort of concerts and things like that are much more energetic than the folk scene, at that point, yeah, even though I knew that my songs had a more folky vibe to it, I'd never really considered that they were stories. And being sort of presented with my own work in this way, going, oh, it's in a book, it's written down. That lyrics themselves, of course, are words, and words can be, words are a medium that can be used in lots of different ways. Like we say, whether we tell the stories, whether we read them, whether we sing them, whether they are used as in memes, which is now a way that we communicate, or even in video and motion picture, they're audible. These all, the way that we communicate through language and through words kind of has no limitations, only on so much as us understanding the language that we are using. And we have a lot of languages all over this planet, and I'm not very good at languages particularly, so I'm going to put my hands up there and say I'm not really multilingual. I can speak a bit of Italian, and that's about it. Although I do speak drunk, I can usually understand somebody if they're drunk. That's a special sort of side quest of a language skill. I must get some extra points there for being able to speak drunk person. But yes, coming back to saying about stories and seeing it sort of presented to me, made me think, actually, yeah, I'm a storyteller, and this concept began to grow on me more and more. Even though I'm a published author, I never crossed the two together, that my stories and my songs were essentially the same thing. Some of them were just put to music. The same happened with Paper Girl. Paper Girl was originally written as a poem for a friend in a birthday card. And it was just, I think, 2 or 3 of the verses just meant as a birthday card, as a supportive birthday card, because we all go through mental health struggles. And then I took it and I wrote some extra verses to it, and the more that I wrote about it, and the more I played it, I realised that my own mental health issues had sort of been injected to it as well, and realised that again this was something bigger. This was something sort of universal that could be understood by more than just the people who had personally experienced it. And then you know, that leads you to think, well, music does that as well. Music touches you emotionally. And, you know, the lyrics of a song, we all have the favourite lyrics of a song. We all have, you know, a favourite quote or a line, something that we give becomes our motto, becomes a meaning to us. One of the things that I say often is an Oscar Wilde quote: "Life's too important to take too seriously," which counsels that we all have a little bit of levity and learn to make fun of ourselves a bit, and we're not too serious or stuck up about things, which I think is very important. We all need to be able to laugh at ourselves and have that sort of humility. Yes, so another thing that's happening today is that my publisher, Beneficia Publishing, which I will drop a link for in the comment, in the description below, is they're having their book fair today, or they've had their book fair today, and this evening they're having a spoken word event. Now, last week I did mention that the possibility of me going down to Dorset to participate, and I hadn't quite made up my mind. And then several things happened, like we had reported cases that the new variant of COVID, Omicron, is here in Nottingham. It became my time for my cycle, and I didn't really feel like going anywhere. And the clincher was that it snowed. Now, I hate snow, and I don't mind saying it's not my favourite weather. Yes, it looks pretty, but because I'm not very steady on my pins, as they say, I don't walk very well, and my knees sort of dislocate a lot. I find it very slippy, and also the temperature drops and it gives me pain. So in that sense, my experience of that weather is never very pleasant. And so the thought of being on a train for 7 hours on public transport, going all the way down to Dorset in the snow, I thought it was wise to probably not do that. So instead, I'm going to give them a shout out. So please go and visit beneficiapublications.com. As I say, I'll drop the link in the description. And yeah, at the moment, as it stands, I have 2 short stories in 2 of their anthologies. I'll show you this one first. This is called Voices from the Ashes, Resurrecting the Witch. And look how chunky that is. Basically, it's got over 400, is it 400 pages? It can't be 400 stories. Over 400 pages of stories from people in the pagan community who, and associated with the pagan community, who have taken the real stories and the real names of people who were executed for witchcraft over the centuries in many different continents and countries, and sort of reimagined their experiences. Now, some are completely fiction. They've just taken the name and the sort of the time period and the circumstances, and they've completely created a story surrounding the instances that might have happened, some of which include the fantasy element of real magic, if you like. Some, right on the other end, are telling a truthful historical account of what actually happened. And some are in the middle, which is kind of like mine. I've taken the events of a group of women that happened, a group of women called the Flowers Women, Margaret, Joan and Philippa Flowers, who were based in Rutland in Leicestershire at Belvoir Castle, which is not too far from where I am in Nottingham. And I researched their story. And to be fair, it was full of loopholes. I don't know how they managed to accuse them of witchcraft, to be frank. And, well, I do actually, because they just didn't like them and they were poor. And that's unfortunately what happened to a lot of the people who appear in this book. They were poor, they were unable to defend themselves, and once they were accused, that was it. And a lot of them, the majority, although not all, the majority of them, the only reason that they were accused is because they were women. So there's a lot to go through, and as you can see, so I'll just show you the plate for my story. I'll just take there we go. That's their logo. I'll show you. So yeah, the Flowers of Botsford. Can you see? Beautiful artwork by Sem Vine. I love it because it looks like a stained glass window. But yes, it's three women, and yeah, it just tells the story. I'm not going to go. No spoilers, because you'll have to go and read it yourself. So it's available on their website. Go and check it out. The other story that I have published at the moment is, I'm going to read you a little bit of an excerpt. It's from, it's got foil on the front of it. It's going to be terrible to try and get you to sort of see what it says, isn't it? But basically, it says 22 Opus Arcana. Now, this copy was the contributor's copy, so it's in red and it's hardback. The copies that are for public release are paperback, and they have a black with a silver cover on it, with a silver lettering on it. But the stories inside are the same, and they've just had a new reprint, which was at the fair today. I'm trying to get it so that you can see that. There we go. It looks, how beautiful is that? 22 Opus Arcana. Yeah. They've just had a reprint of this with some new artwork. Mainly because they've just had a bit of a reshuffle around with some of their authors and artists, and yes, so some artists have left the company, and that left the opportunity for me to have Into the Woods popped into the book as the plate for this book. This is the previous piece of art, which is done by Cheryl Waldron, and I love it so much. I actually bought the original canvas of this, which I have downstairs in my living room. It's a very small canvas, but it's absolutely gorgeous. That's probably about the actual size, a little bit smaller than A4, but yeah, beautifully painted. I love it. But yes, it left an opportunity for me to have my own artwork. So now the new reprint, if you make sure you get the new reprint from Beneficia, it will have the Into the Woods as the plate at the beginning of the story, which I'm very excited about. Also, I left the calendar downstairs. They've put a calendar out this year, which is for 2022, which has sort of all of the pagan festivals and Sabbats in it, all of the moon phases in it, and some other interesting sort of pagan relative days. And they've featured the artwork in the images at the top. So mine is in January, which is nice because my birthday is in January, and also the January moon is the wolf moon, so it's appropriate. So yes. That also appears in the calendar, which is quite exciting. There's only a limited number of these. If you want them, go to the website. Get yours quick. Get those gifts in for Christmas. So, yes, I don't know which section of this I kind of want to read to you, or whether just to read from the beginning. I think I might read the climax of it. I think if we can find the part where yes, I think this is a good idea. Let's see if we can find a nice place to begin. She grasped the hem of her cloak, pulling it high enough so as not to trip, and taking a firm grip on the handle of her sword, the hunter shifted her weight, ready to sprint. Another growl rolled out from the shadow. The hounds were gaining ground. It now had to be otherwise. It had to be now, otherwise the hounds would flank and close in. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath and swallowed hard, before opening them and running for all she was worth. She was nimble and sure-footed over the uneven floor of the forest, leaping ditches and vaulting fallen branches. She knew this place. It was her sanctuary, every bank, every dyke, every fallen oak. The elders had always said that spending too much time in the wood was unnatural, that it would lead to inner wildness and in turn forsake the protection of the village. The hunter did not care. The forest was sacred. It was alive. The wind whispered to her through the trees, while the stream's beautiful song captivated her, lifting her spirit when she was down, and the rocky tor offered shelter when needed. The forest offered its own protection to those who loved it. If there was a supernatural beast that prowled each full moon, sometimes wolf, sometimes human, that so callously broke and shamed so many of her sisterhood, then she would find it, and bring its reign of terror to an end by delivering the beast's head while wearing its still bloody pelt. The hunter's concentration faltered as her mind wandered to her glorious victory, briefly forgetting the slavering dogs that were growling ever closer. She lost her footing, slipping on the rotting mulch, and tumbled into a heap. Her bow slid off her shoulder, while her quiver spilled arrows from her back to be lost amongst the bracken. The tor, if it wasn't, certainly seemed a fair distance away, and the shadows of the hounds were now visible amongst the trees. Get up, she willed herself, still slightly winded from the fall, stumbling a little as she stooped to grab her falling weapons before racing off once more into the night. Her hood fell backwards, revealing a mass of unruly locks and fierce eyes. The silvery light of the full moon touched her skin, illuminating the hound's quarry, and the hunt quickened as she aimed for the tor, running as fast as she could. With her fistful of arrows and her cloak billowing behind her, she ducked through the low branches and into a clearing. The full moon drenched the majestic form of the tor, stacked clumsily under the cold, clear sky in front of her in silvery light. The copse was dense at the foot of the rock, but she knew the path, and she hoped that the hounds didn't. She didn't even break step as she leapt onto the stone. The pack of dogs, their jaws slack with saliva, burst through the tree line. She risked a glance over her shoulder to see them grind to a halt, trying to navigate the dense thorny bushes, barking. She could hear their hunger, and she knew it wouldn't be long before they would break through the undergrowth and resume their chase. She was right. Moments later they were only feet away. They slowed and fanned out to her flank on either side. She kept going, each stride steeper and higher, as they followed her, first onto the low stones that poked through the earth, gaining distance as they climbed. The contrast of the hard stone surface compared to the soft forest floor was an immediate advantage to the hounds, and before long they were snapping at her heels. But still, she climbed. She could hear the howl of her prey in the distance, but she knew she had no chance of resuming her hunt, not now, not while she herself was being hunted. A hound caught the corner of her cloak in its sharp teeth and shook its head vigorously, leaning back on its haunches, tugging at her, determined to pull her from the rock. She could see the bloodlust in its eyes. It was a look she knew well. She had seen it in her own eyes only the night before. She slipped slightly, just managed to kick out, connecting the toe of her boot squarely on its jaw. Whimpering, it rolled away, threads of fabric still lacing its mouth. Using the momentum of the kick, she tried desperately to swing herself up onto the ledge out of their reach, but no avail. She slipped again and came face to face with the hounds. She gripped her sword tighter than ever, determined that she would not be their prey, and a fleeting thought passed through her mind. Could this have been the fate of those before? She heard the howl of the wolf she had been stalking. He seemed closer now, but so many thoughts were racing through her head it was impossible to really be sure of anything. She was determined to stand her ground, however futile. She would not go down without a fight. Dun dun dun! Yes, so that's just an excerpt of basically what is Forever Wild in prose form. Prose form? Prose? Yes, so, yeah, I decided why not write it as the full story and add into it some of the backstory, if you like, the larger metaphor, of what I see in that story. So the story of Red Riding Hood, as we know it as a children's story, is basically a young girl walks through the forest. She, on her way to grandmother's house, she's laden up with a basket of cakes and sweets and a picnic, and told to stick to the path, not to speak to any strangers, and deliver the basket of goodies to Grandma at the other end of the forest. She sets off on her journey, and she meets a wolf. He asks if he can have some of the bread and the cheese and the cakes that are in her basket. She says no. She says that she must go straight to Grandma's house. And then, along the path, he follows her. She meets him again. He asks a second time, can he have some of the bread and cakes from her basket? And she says no. I mustn't stray from the path. I must go straight to Grandma's house. She's waiting for me. Then she comes across a woodcutter. And the woodcutter, being a strapping, well-respectable white man, tempts her off the path to eat picnic and have her lunch with the woodcutter, who is seen as trustworthy. Basically, he's an approved person she's allowed to speak to. She has her lunch with him. She heads back upon the path to Grandma's house in the afternoon, where she meets the wolf one last time. And again, he's unable to persuade her. So he runs ahead to Grandma's house, where he jumps into Grandma's bed. Well, jumps into Grandma's house, eats her up, puts on her nightcap, sits in bed, and pretends to be Grandma, so that when Red Riding Hood arrives, what big eyes you have, what big ears you have, and what big teeth you have. And before he can gobble her up as well, the wolf cutter comes in as the hero white saviour he is, chops the wolf in half. Grandma steps out whole and saves the day. This is very reductionist, and also this is, if you like, the sanitised version that was how the story was changed from the sort of original darker story of Red Riding Hood, which in its essence is a coming of age story for young women. It was told amongst women, two young girls who were about to start menstruating or coming into puberty, and had to learn to now navigate the changes of their body, and also the fact that they would now be open to suitors and the sexual desires and lusts of other people, as well as their own lusts and sexual desires. But of course, by engaging in sexual activity, it meant that there was a risk that they could be pregnant before having a partner with which to help support them. And these are the things that were told. These were the things that were told. It was a story that needed to be passed down, and the best way to do that, sometimes to get a message across, is in story form. So the idea that Red Riding Hood has a red cloak, this is the red of her blood, her bleeding has started, and this is, you can also say it's a metaphor for her genitalia having a red hood. It depends how descriptive you want to go into that metaphor. And as she's walking through the woods, this is her journey from being a little girl to being a mature woman, and having the wisdom of the crone, of Grandma, who is at the other end of the forest. She's told to ignore the lustful advances of others, and also to ignore her own nature. The only time she's allowed to step off the path is in the company of an approved suitor. The only time that she's allowed to share the goodies that are in her basket is when she's with someone who is seen as decent and trustworthy and suitable and appropriate. She's not allowed to choose that person for herself, and she's not allowed to act on her own impulses. So again, she is resisting the wolf, um, when she arrives at grandmother's house. Um, However, the story is that grandmother, by living alone and being an independent woman, having no husband since her husband died, presumably she's a widow, um, since she lives alone in the woods, she is susceptible to the temptations of um, sexual desire, and that's the reason why the wolf is able to overcome her. But the good white Christian man pulls her back from her sin, and is able to rescue her. There's a very different version of that how it originally started out, where the wolf is more of a companion, and the wolf is told, the women are told that wolf, that sexual energy, that female power that you have, that is yours and yours alone, and you shouldn't let anybody take it from you. You shouldn't let anybody hunt it. You shouldn't let, if anyone's going to hunt it, you need to hunt it and go and find it. You need to find it for yourself. And then when you have found it, you need to protect it. And it will protect you. It will, if you stand up for yourself and you have a masculine side as well as a feminine side, you will be a much more well-rounded person, and you will do better in life. You'll be a stronger woman. And again, the wisdom of the crone, in the other story, when she gets there, and there's a wolf in the bed, Grandma claws her way out from the inside, as it's described, which is basically saying that Grandma is a werewolf. She sheds the wolf and returns back to being a grandma and says, see, I am able to control this. It is part of me. Yes, it might be scary sometimes. Yes, it may not be accepted all of the time, but it is a part of me, and it's a part of you, and you should be afraid of it. You should nurture it. So that aspect of the Red Riding Hood story is the part of the story, or the metaphor in the story, that interests me and why I'm so deeply connected to it. It is the theme of Forever Wild music video. You will be able to see this played out a little better once you sort of see the story and how the characters are portrayed, rather than being those stereotypical sanitized fairy tale characters. They are more of the darker version. And again, the story that's written here in this anthology is also meant to say that the elders of the village saying that she shouldn't be a hunter, she shouldn't do non-feminine, stereotypical feminine roles within the society, and if she does step outside of that, outside of those parameters, that she will be punished for it, i.e. she'll have the hounds set out after her. Obviously there's a little more backstory in there, which I won't have any more spoilers. I'll let you go and read that again. It's available on the Veneficia website. So if you are a reader and you do like a good juicy story, there are 22 stories in here. Obviously, the reason it's called 22 Opus Arcana is a reference to the tarot deck. Excuse me. So there are 22 cards of the major arcana. So for those of you who know tarot, there's the suit deck, the 4 suits with their numbers and their court cards, and then there's like a sort of second deck, the major arcana, which has kind of trump cards. They're like virtues and vices and things like that, picture cards that hold more weight. And in themselves, they kind of tell a story. They are a storytelling device in themselves, the tarot. And so a story was, the authors we each picked a card, and we wrote a story for that card. It didn't have to be the story of the card, and of course I chose the moon, because it's the full moon. And in fact, I think the opening line of the story is, the howl rose like the full moon, because that's the line, right? So yes, that's why it's called 22 Opus Arcana. Go and read it. It's awesome. Yeah, not just obviously my story. I mean, there's 21 other amazing stories and some poetry and amazing artwork. A lot of the artwork done by Sem Vine. I love her artwork. She's, beautiful, beautiful stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of coming to the end of today's little thing about the power of storytelling. What I am interested to know is, what are the stories that have moved you? What, stories that make you cry. We've all had a good cry at a movie when we've been so invested in it. We've all shed a tear as we've been reading a book and a favorite character has bit the dust or something like that. There's even been books in my life where I've been that frightened and I've had to close them and put them down. Both of them were Stephen King books, by the way. Misery, when she hobbled him. Oh, I couldn't read that. I physically had to put the book down. But the thing is, it's in your head. Again, the beauty of books. What's that phrase? Staring at dead trees, hallucinating vividly. That's basically reading. So, I wish you vivid hallucinations while you stare at your favourite dead tree. Yeah, the power of storytelling, not just in book form, but in song form as well. Bardic traditions, oral traditions of passing on ancestral history, ancestral memories of creation myths on a cultural level. And of course, we also touched on the slightly more modern concept of mass media and the way that stories are in our society today, the way that stories still play a huge part in world affairs. The way that people vote, the way that people form alliances and choose enemies are often related to the stories that have grown up around those figures. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Please leave me some comments. I will read them all, and get back to you. I want to hear which stories are the ones that made you cry. Next week, as we get closer towards Yuletide, next week's Wild Night will be centered all around the pagan traditions of Yuletide. So why is Yuletide different from Christmas? How is it the same to a lot of the Christmas traditions that we see in our modern society? Where have they come from? And how and why are they almost the same as a lot of the pagan traditions? Funny that. Also, this is the last week that I will be on YouTube live. So we're going to move Wild Night, the live stream, going to move it to Facebook, as I feel that there are more of you there who are able to interact, because I get messages or I get comments afterwards that obviously relate to the live, but I'm unable to see it. I'm still not figuring out of my software yet. So next week we'll be on Facebook, and that's on the Keep Me Forever Wild Facebook page. I'll be going live via Facebook, and then the following day the video will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can still catch it there, but it won't be interactive on YouTube, and it will be there by Saturday lunchtime. So next Friday, join me on Facebook at Keep Me Forever Wild for next week's Pagan Yuletide themed Wild Night. Until then, stay safe, stay wild. See you later. Bye.